So welcome, my name's Andrew and you're watching the Kelley's Country Life. And in this episode, we're gonna share some tips and tricks on how we found our property, some ways to kind of get off the beaten path, hopefully find yourself a deal. And more importantly, we're gonna cover a lot of very important notes that we wish we had have known back whenever we purchased our property. And it may keep you from turning your dream property into a nightmare and making some huge financial mistakes. So for starters, let's talk about how we got a really good deal on our property and some ways that you may want to go start looking for property itself, and then we'll dive into all the really important watch outs, lookouts for that piece of property before you go sign that dotted line. So we have 50 acres here. We did purchase it quite a few years ago, but I still think a lot of this information applies. Back then we just come out of that last housing bubble that had popped and the economy was all over the place. Prices were highly inflated, but they were starting to do a reset. I believe we're going to be seeing some of that going on right now. Sadly, yes, things are overinflated as we're all currently dealing with. So for starters, how we really got such a good deal in this place is because, well, believe it or not, nobody knew it was for sale. And what I mean by that is I spent years and years and years looking for property, and I'm doing just what you're doing. I went on the big Zillows, the big realtor.coms, and all these other websites. And when I could find good property, it was sold immediately. And then nowadays you're seeing this crazy stuff where it's posted and people are paying above asking price. It's just insane. We know this isn't gonna go on forever. So the first thing that I suggest that y'all do, quit going to the big name brand search companies. Yes, that's worth going and looking there. But what I started doing was finding locations that we knew that we potentially may want to go live in. So I started typing in that county or local cities nearby. And what I would do is search such and such county realty company or real estate office, and I would go start looking at their actual listings on their personal website. Now, yes, a lot of times these companies are going to straight upload stuff to realtor.com, Zillow, and everywhere else, but I got very fortunate and found a small town company that I seen their postings nowhere else other than their personal website. That's good news. That means very few eyes are actually seeing that. We found a piece of property, we come out, we look at it. Man, we knew this was the one, but why on earth has nobody bought it? Because it was already listed for a good price. Well, it turns out the for sale sign for the property had been mowed over and was down in the ditch, and looks like it hadn't been used in months. I mean, just destroyed, covered in mildew, you name it. So by me doing a little research and finding this hole in the wall realty company, searching through their private listings, getting off the big name brands, finding this property, and then going to it and seeing that there was no for sale signs anywhere, I knew that very few people knew this property was actually for sale. Long story short, we were able to submit an even lower offer. It got countered and we bought the property for what was an amazing price. But the key to the story is don't go where everybody else is going. So some other suggestions that I have for you for finding that property that's, well, nobody knows it's for sale. Go try to find property that's not even listed. Don't be scared to go up and, if you see a piece of property, knock on the door. If you know that there's been a death in a certain family and a certain piece of property is going to come up, I mean, as bad as that may sound, that's life. Chances are people that are going to inherit the property already live somewhere else. They don't want nothing to do with it. There's another opportunity to go maybe be first in line for a piece of property. Another tip, get in your vehicle and drive around. A lot of people are doing for sale by owner properties and they're not really taking the time to list them. They're literally sticking signs out front, and you're gonna have to get in your vehicle. Make a day of it, make it enjoyable. Get your wife in the car, your family, go start riding these backcountry roads in areas where you know that you're looking for land, and look for those signs. You'd be surprised at how many people are avoiding the realtors altogether, selling land on their own, and again, just not listing it properly online. It's also worth noting places like Facebook, put a filler out there. Hey, in such and such county, we're looking to buy some property in this range. Does anybody know any that's for sale? Again, there's always going to be somebody that knows due to a death in the family or maybe a divorce or something that's going on. Something's coming up and available before it ever got listed on the real estate companies. So try to think ahead. There's lots of ways to go find property, be first in line, and not have to compete in this crazy market that we're dealing with right now. Okay, so let's dive right into some extremely important information that a lot of people overlook. And again, it can literally take your dream property to your nightmare property. A lot of times you might find that perfect piece of property and it's a good deal, too good to be true. Oftentimes there's a reason why. Don't be that person that rushes into it because you're scared somebody's going to buy it out from under you, and you find out there's something major going on the property that's either going to be very costly or that will keep you from being able to build and use that property as intended. So one of the first and very important things to me is, can you get water on your property and how good is it? There's lots of things you can still do to a piece of property that can change dramatically in cost and make what was once a good deal not a good deal at all. Now, if you find that perfect piece of property and you put it under contract, chances are the seller's not going to allow you to put it under an extended contract. We put ours under a 30-day contract. Get as long as they will possibly lock the deal in for. This gives you time to go out and check things. So can you get water on the property? How much is it going to cost? Are you budgeting properly for this? That's going to be a very tough one to figure out. What you could do is call the local well drillers, say, hey, do you know the area? I'm thinking about buying property right here. Have you seen any issues with the wells? They may tell you, yeah, a lot of hard water there, or sulfur or iron. Just about every well we drill in that area, people have to put in softeners. Well, now you know the well cost plus an additional probably $5,000, $6,000, or $7,000 on top of that. That's something worth going ahead and figuring out. Again, you're buying that piece of property. There could be a neighbor right there next door. Don't be afraid to go over there and knock on the door. Thinking about buying this piece of property right here. How's your water? How was the well? How deep did you have to go? All those are very important. Wells can be all over the place on price. Here, for example, your average well's priced up to 100 foot deep. A lot of them are drilled less than that, and it's usually around $5,000 to $6,000. You can go to the next county over where wells are extremely shallow, and you can practically put one in yourself for under $1,000 because you can just about hand drill the well. The water is so shallow. But then you go to places like up north, if you have mountainous areas, a lot of rock. You may have to drill several hundred feet through hard rock that could be out there for days. Those wells could be $25,000, $35,000, maybe $50,000. The prices can be all over the place, so make sure you're prepared for that. So behind me right here is my septic tank, and this is my leach field. This is another very important point to talk about and often overlooked. A lot of people buy property and find out that they can't even put a septic tank on the property. Now, I'm assuming that you're buying property, put in a traditional residential style home, septic system, everything. There's ways around that. Are you willing to do an outhouse? Does your county allow that? Composting toilets, there's some other options, but the average home is going to have a septic tank. Now, there's all different types of systems, mound systems, pump style systems, natural free flowing systems like we have, and the prices range dramatically. But most important, can your soil support a certain type of system? That's very important. So the longer you can lock a contract in, if you've made a deal and say, hey, there's stipulations, I need to get a few of these things checked. Can I get power, water, septic, and build my house on this property? That needs to be part of how you lock your contract in. Sometimes that may be available, sometimes it might not be. But if you can get a contract locked in long enough, one of the things I would do is say, I would like to pull some soil sample tests off the property. Now, you're gonna have to be relatively close to where you think you might build a home on the property. It costs about $150, cheap insurance in my mind, to pay someone that's certified with the sanitation department to come out, pull a few soil samples, go get them tested, and it's called a percolation test. They can let you know, hey, the soil is good and will support a septic system or will not. Depending on the flood stage of your property, if there's any flood land, how high it is, that also makes a big determination if you can put in a septic system. If you have enough flood going on, not gonna happen. Areas that's prone to partial flood, you'll have to do mound type systems. And again, they vary greatly depending on where you live. But you wanna make for sure that you can get some sort of septic system in, assuming you're gonna build a house on this property. Okay, so let's talk about the subject of power. You can see our power pole here behind us. One very important thing about a new piece of property is power available. Can you actually run it in here? And there's a lot of very important points to know about power. So assuming it's nearby and you didn't purchase a piece of property that has absolutely no power available, we're going to rule out the talking about solar. windmills and other things such as that. So first and foremost, what's important to keep in mind, some electrical co-ops will actually run power to your property for free, assuming you have, well, house plans or you're starting the permitting process for a house. So keep that in mind, that could save you some money. But chances are you're going to have to pay to bring it on the property. And you're still going to need some sort of permit, whether that's a temporary power pole for a pump and well, for agricultural purposes, for an RV, those qualify at least in my area. So you're going to need to price that out as well. Some of you may have to run thousands of feet and may be responsible for paying every bit of it. Some of you may have to trench and run underground. That can all get extremely expensive. It's something to know ahead of time, but most importantly, make sure power is actually available to you. Here's another important point that caught me by surprise that I had no idea about until we bought this property. Whenever I went and applied to get power run onto this property, I was told by the electrical co-op, the power is on your neighbors over here. We're actually going to have to tie into his pole and run onto your property. I thought, sure, that's no problem. So it turns out, legally, my neighbor had to sign, I believe it was a right-of-way form, maybe it was some sort of power easement. I can't remember exactly how it was. And had my neighbor not signed off and allowed for us to tie into that pole and run over here, we wouldn't have power, or we would have had to come in a completely different way on the property. And that may not be available to you. So another awesome point to bring up right here. I keep talking about the neighbors. Make sure your neighbors are friendly and things will work out. That's why I say they can be so helpful, but they can actually be hurtful too. Fortunately, we live somewhere that we've had zero issues, and things like tapping into power and whatever else we needed were no problems at all. So something else that wound up being a blessing in disguise for us we had no idea about, and you may want to look into this as you're looking for property. The closer your property apparently is to a substation, we have one just down the road, and there's a high transmission power line there. We're finding out from the neighbors that apparently anytime we have like major hurricanes or outages, the power company tends to start at that substation and work out restoring power. Being that we are so close by, we typically are rarely without power long. If you're miles and miles and miles away, that may be hours or days before you get power restored. While that's not a deal breaker for us for land, we have lots of backup power solutions that may be extremely important to you. So keep that in mind. The closer you get to those, the quicker you typically get your power restored. All right, so the next subject we should talk about, and it's an extremely important one. I highly desired water on my property, and we have little ponds throughout, but low-lying areas just like this. And a lot of you are going to desire some sort of lake, pond, some sort of water access. So this is a step that I highly recommend that nobody, and I mean nobody, skip whenever they buy a piece of property. Even if you have what appears to be a high and dry piece of property, it could be in a flood zone. So assuming you lock in a contract on a piece of property or before you purchase it, whatever way that may be, you need to go up to your local building department. At least that's where I found my flood and topography survey information. You can tell them the piece of property, the parcel ID that you're looking to purchase, and you can ask to see the topography map. And it'll have different stages, different grades showing if your property is in a flood zone or not. Just because you don't see water does not mean that it is. Now, the reason that's extremely important, depending on where you want to build your home on that property and its elevation, you may not be eligible at all to build, or it may require a house on stilts and some odd building techniques. It may affect your septic system that we just discussed. It may require that you have to do flood insurance on your home. Now you're talking a major lifetime increase on the cost of that property, because now it's being added for the lifetime into the home. So flood is extremely important. It determines a lot of things for your property. Now, luckily for us, when we went and pulled that topography map and showed where we're going to build a house, there's 35 foot of elevation change from here, our low-lying swampy area, to where the house is. No risk of flood whatsoever. Double check that. Now here we are out in our beautiful woods. This is another very important point to bring up, and something I didn't realize at the time back when we purchased property. But depending on where you're at in the country, it is not uncommon for a piece of property to be sold, and guess what? The property does not include timber rights or what's beneath the dirt, mineral rights. That's quite uncommon here in our area, but I have read some horror stories online of people purchasing a piece of property and not doing any research to figure out that, well, guess what? Somebody can come back years later and say, I'm here to collect on the mineral rights that I own on this property. We're going to dig it up. Or I'm here to collect on the timber rights. The timber you thought you owned, you do not. That is a very scary one and something I highly recommend you look into, especially if that's common in your area. Now, another very important point to bring up, the timber itself, it's worth something. It adds value to your property, and that's worth factoring in whenever you negotiate. Now, we have no plans to cut this timber out here, even though it's classified as merchantable, but it's always available, maybe for retirement years or something such as that. But that does add value to your property if you're thinking about cutting, clearing, and getting a lot of that money back to help pay for it or to finance something like a home. There's also another very important point to bring up with that. For example, down here in the south, if you have a lot of pines on your property, and depending on the classification of the timber, well, that actually will classify you to be what's called a tree farmer, as long as you're going to show some upkeep there. So that's a heck of a tax write-off. There are a lot of equipment that you use to take care of your property. Well, you get tax write-offs with that. So the property is actually helping you take care of and purchase some things that you otherwise were already going to purchase. So back to that ag exemption, depending on the type of property and how much acreage you have, you may qualify for that ag exemption, which means very low taxes for the year, especially if you can start growing timber, you're going to do animals, something else on it that'll qualify you for that. So keep that in mind. That really does help with property taxes. Now, speaking of property, I'm assuming you're watching this probably because you're trying to buy a little bit larger piece of property like we did. A lot of people don't understand that just because you say you buy 50 acres like we did, you think that I can just block off what I want, sell some down the road. Maybe we're going to buy more property than we need right now and we're going to sell it. Well, that isn't always the case. So typically what happens is there is what's called a certain number of dwellings per acre. Now, having that ag classification like we do here is awesome. It really does help with our taxes. However, having ag classification really hurts you in our area. We're only allowed to put one house per 10 acres if I remember correctly. The next ag classification down allows you to do one house per 5 acres is the most common here. So don't be thinking you're going to buy a large piece of property, go subdivide it up, sell it off to a bunch of people that think they're going to come build homes on it. Because you may go up to the property appraiser's office or wherever you go and they may tell you, well, you can't subdivide and sell but a certain amount of property. So keep that in mind if you think you're buying some and going to lob some off to sell and help pay for the purchase. One other very important point to bring up here is the property that you're buying landlocked. Does it require an easement for one of the neighbors? That can become a very touchy subject, and it's something you really need to know ahead of time. Now, if you're purchasing through a realtor, they should already know if your property is landlocked or not, and you need to check the regulations in your area. Does someone have to provide you an easement to the property? In most cases, yes. Who is it? How much trouble are you going to have with that? That can be a major issue when purchasing a piece of property. A lot of times in the past, I've seen property going for really good value because it was in the middle of nowhere with no road access, and someone's literally going to have to give up a piece of their property and allow you to cut and blaze a trail through to go back to yours. That can get very touchy and complicated. So a few other points to talk about and we'll wrap this up. How does the property compare to other properties in the area? That's going to be very important, especially if you're going to get a loan. You need to see comparable sales. Now, sadly, we're on a high hill right here with a good valued property, but at the time that we purchased, a lot of the comparable sales in the area were property that's literally a few miles down the road, low-lying land, swampy land, flood-prone land, and the value reflected that. So that could impact you. You may have found the perfect piece of property, but comparable sales, well, sadly, a lot of banks and a lot of appraisers look at that. Demand that the appraiser actually drive out here. You'd be shocked at how many won't actually even come to the property and they'll just look at local sales. That is not the right way to do it. Hopefully you'll have one that'll come out and give just value to the property. Now, speaking of property value, one other thing to really pay attention to, does your property butt up to, say, state land that gives you access to more recreational land? That increases the value. Does it butt up to other higher value properties for whatever reason that may be? Are you purchasing in a potential up and coming area down the road and you're expecting your property value to increase? Those all help make big decisions on how much you should spend, how valuable the property is. So another big mistake that I see people make, they'll go out and find the perfect piece of property or what appears to be so, and it seems to be priced correctly, and they buy it because that's all they can focus on, only to later realize the property was priced correctly for the area? What's the local job economy and job market like? For example, in our area, we have some of the lowest household incomes in the nation. Well, guess what? The property needs to reflect that. Are you moving from one area to the next? Are you about to have to go take a major pay cut in a job? How far away is the nearest hospital? Are you getting older and this is your retirement property that you're purchasing? How far away are good doctors, hospitals, things such as that? For us, honestly, the first recommended hospital is about 45 miles away. Now, we have some a lot closer for emergencies, but the ones that are rated really good, you're traveling a long ways. For good doctors and dentists and other things such as that, a lot of people are traveling hour and a half round trip away from where we live. So that's big factors. What about grocery stores? Are you going to be a little more self-sufficient? Well, then okay, rural piece of property is probably good for you. Are you needing to go out to eat every night? Do you have the desire to do that, go shopping all the time? Well, you wouldn't want to live where we do, because that is a heck of a travel to those places. So don't get blinded by what you think is a perfect piece of property, only to realize schools are so far away, doctors, dentists, hospitals, and things that you really desire or really need. All right, so I'm sure there is quite a few things that I missed. That's what the comment section's for, but I just don't see nobody talking about this stuff. Everybody wants to rush out, purchase that piece of property, and some of these things are crucially important, and you need to make for sure that you lock in the sale, give yourself a window, put that in the contract, and go check some of these things. You won't have time to check all of them most likely, unless you find a seller that's just really willing to give you the time. But there are some of these that will make or break the property, especially if you're looking to build on it in the future. Now, if you're just looking for a piece of recreational property only, well, then a lot of this does not apply. And yeah, you can kind of make the deal a whole lot quicker. So hopefully you enjoyed it. We have a lot of information like this on the channel. Please go check it out, and we have a lot more videos coming. Catch you on the next one.